Once upon a time, in a faraway land.
What are fairy stories?
The strange and wondrous place where nothing is as it seems.
Magic mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest?
Fairy is a perilous land.
Before she found herself falling down what seemed to be a very deep well.
It is the place you visit
A world
in your
of
dreams.
myth and magic.
When the clock began to
The
chime
evening
midnight,
star sailed down through the
A
sky.
mysterious voice began calling to the sad
She
princess.
pricked her finger with her needle. 3 drops of blood fell on the
In a
small
trance,
white
she
finger.
followed the haunting
And peered
sound
into
of
the
a
hollow
winding
tree.
stairway to the top of the
You
tower.
can read along with me in your book.
she waved her wand and said the magic words.
Let's begin now.
Well met, witches. Welcome once again to Storybook, Sacred Lore of Witchcraft. Today we'll be discussing a story by the Brothers Grimm called The White Snake, which was published in their first edition of Household Tales from 1812. And I've invited a very special guest to discuss this tale with us, Nathan M. Hall, the author of Path of the Moonlit Hedge. Hi, Nathan. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. It's really it's great to be here. I'm so happy to be on the show. I live in South Florida. I've been on a witchy path for a good portion of my life, since probably in my teenage years, in one form or fashion. I think one of the best things about the path of the witch is how it zigs and zags, and it's never always consistently one thing. It's constantly updating and changing and adjusting to life, and which is what makes it so incredibly powerful and magical, is that it's adjusting to our world and what the world needs out of witches at any specific time.
I agree.
And welcome back, Anibel from AB's Witches Journal.
I am the fresh blood on the team, I will say. My name is AB. I am as I typically say, I'm a beginner practitioner, and pretty much in social media, what I do is showcasing a little bit of my own practice and my experience. I'm just 6 years into my practice, so I'm utilizing that space to showcase, like, hey, this is what a beginner is doing. And that transition between beginner and maybe a little bit more not so beginner. So this is me.
And our weathered wise man, Dave Gaddy.
I'm old home folk now. I'm just a southern witch. Practice is pretty eclectic. It's based on folklore, traditional craft, all of that good stuff. Just had a book release February 20th called The Simple Magic of Wild Things. You can get it on Amazon and rebelsatori.com. That's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Great, thank you.
Or nutcase, whichever you want.
And I have an unusual thought on starting today's discussion, which is that I wanted to read this excerpt of a version of, like, kind of the background of the magic tradition that I often hear. Like, I think there's various threads, but kind of commonalities of where our magic tradition comes from. And this is like one succinct version of it, where the original magicians learned their magic. No one could say for sure, but according to tradition, the knowledge could be traced back to the dawn of human civilization. Some say that the magic secrets were first revealed to the sages of ancient Egypt. Others hold that magic had been handed down from great civilizations that were far older than Egypt. All traces of such civilizations, like Atlantis, have long since disappeared. Whatever the origins of magic, say the legends, the knowledge gave the Magi the power to rule the world. Their rule was a wise and benevolent one. But man is an imperfect being, and the Magi were all ultimately overthrown by the warriors. The Magi realized that mankind was not ready for the knowledge that they possessed, so they withdrew from public view. They hid themselves so well that people began to doubt that they had even existed. In order that the great secrets of magic should not be lost to mankind forever, the Magi fully initiated into their numbers a few select and worthy individuals every generation. Thus, the traditions and the secrets of the ancient brotherhood could be preserved until such time as they would be revealed to the world once again. And I bring that up as sort of one lens that I like to approach the story that we're going to talk about from. When I first started hosting these discussions, this was one of the stories I was most excited to cover, and I've had it in my back pocket this whole time, just like waiting for what seemed to be the right time. And so I'm so happy that you agreed to talk about it with us, Nathan.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. This is awesome.
The tale begins with, first we're introduced to the king, and he's supposed to be a wise and benevolent king who receives a secret meal every day. I'm thinking of the king personally as maybe a deity, but that's just where my mind went. And the servant who takes the secret meal of the king, and it grants him the language of the animals or the language of birds. In my mind, the king may have been a king, a sacred king, or it might have been a deity. And either way, he was able to secure some of that power for himself.
I was going to say, my theological background. The first thing I thought of was the Garden of Eden. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the king being the deity, as you said.
Sure.
But then you have the servant who was not supposed to know what was on the plate, was not supposed to have a part of that, but snuck and took a piece. And in that received the knowledge of the language of the animals.
There was to me, there's a lot to just unpack in this just right at the beginning. I think the story itself is, even with all of the magical elements, it was still written in a very Christian society. So a king would be as close to God as you could get in that context, in that patriarchal hierarchy of things, that, the king was akin to God or next to God or just below God or whatever. So it would be like a deity or a demigod of some sort. But I really, what popped out at me almost immediately was how similar the opening is, especially with the discovery of what was in the hidden little pot or whatever, of Gwian's labors for Caradwyn in the story of Taliesin, where in that story, Gwian is laboring for a year and a day for Caradwyn and happens to spill 3 drops of the potion that's being made, and gains enlightenment essentially by sticking his thumb into his mouth, and because it's burning. And I just saw such a parallel to that kind of story structure or whatever, where this character, the servant, who I don't think we ever have a name for the servant, but becomes this, kicks off this grand adventure by, surreptitiously in his circumstance, sort of on the sly, kind of sneaks a little piece of the wisdom.
Through the food of the gods in both cases, yes.
Right.
And interestingly, in this case, when he opens up the cover from the silver plate, he sees a white snake is the secret food of the gods.
I think that's what took me back to a theological end of it, because in Genesis the snake is the one that imparts the wisdom or initiates that. And the same thing here with the tasting of the snake. That's where the magic starts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a popular little book from the late 90s called The Cosmic Serpent by Jeremy Narby, where he talks about tabaqueros and ayahuasqueros. And in his experience living with them, he found that the ayahuasca visions often produced visions of snakes. And the ayahuasquero told him that the tobacco and the ayahuasca were ways for them to be able to hear the language of the forest, which the parallel with here is making my brain explode. He goes on to talk about how he makes sense of that through microbiology and DNA. But the serpent and ecstatic practices are worldwide phenomenon.
I think there's, you can even just look at the serpent in this story as like in the classic symbolism of serpents as these agents of transformation. You know, they're agents of enormous healing potential and transformative potential. So kind of like right in the first paragraph, we know that this servant is going to be going on an enormous and massively transformative journey.
And the fact that the snake is described as a white snake, I'm seeing its coils, I'm seeing its unusual color, and I'm thinking honestly of mushrooms and like the coils of the rhizomic network underground. And I know you've been writing about mycelium magic and are soon to present a workshop on it. Would you like to jump in here, Nathan, about that?
Yeah. I mean, for me, that was just the relationship with the mycelial network, I think is really connected to fairy in a way that, has always been like there, but like, people associate maybe things like fairies or, things like the fairy realm with, mushrooms because of the sort of hidden and subterranean elements of what's going on there. But I really wanted to just for myself try to figure out how to incorporate my animistic sort of cooperation with different beings into the mushroom kingdom, because I started having a lot of experiences with them, and not even on the really fun kind of mushrooms, just the normal, and not to say that they're not normal, but just the garden variety mushrooms that just popped up literally in and around my garden. And yeah, I think that there's a lot of potential for transformation there, and it does kind of tie into that sort of the themes of snakes, and even like when you were mentioning the ayahuasquero, there's a really favorite painting of mine that was created by an ayahuasquero, and there are elements that feel like, there's like snakes in it, and there are subterranean creatures and lots of things like that. So yeah, I think the mycelial connection to humanity is just opening up. Really, it's opening up in a scientific way, and I think it's there for all of us to really dig into and explore magically. It's something that I'm very passionate about. Clearly, I'm gushing about it, but I think that there are people who have incorporated it into their magic in the past, and I think that there's a lot of potential for where it's going to go in the future. And I'm just happy to be like a little page in the process.
You wrote about how at first it was almost like taboo that a mushroom should pop up in your well cared for garden. What
Right.
What then inspired you to shift from being like almost embarrassed about them or to not want them to looking at them magically and working with them?
Well, in that particular case, it was because the mushroom, it was a stinkhorn mushroom, or a variety of stinkhorn mushroom. They have lots of different species that exist in that group, but some of them smell like dog poop, some of them smell like vomit, and some of them smell like semen, and it's really weird. Like when you're like gardening and you're just always smelling like something that smells a little like gym socks, or a mix of that and semen, like in the bushes while you're working. Like, what's going on in my bushes? Who's getting up to what around here? So I started investigating, and then actually found, was lucky enough to find it one time. They're, like all mushrooms, they're really unassuming. There's, well, not all of them, but, it was a little diminutive, and, it would have been easy for me to miss. But it was really cool. And I was like, well, this is coming to my doorstep for some reason, whatever it might be, I don't know. And it keeps reappearing. So that in itself is telling me that I need to open myself up magically to working with it. And I did. I didn't end up doing a whole lot of work with the stinkhorn in particular, although I feel like the established sort of relationship is there. Mm-hmm. It's kind of set now. And so it's something I can look to in the future if I want to. But I did start working with plenty of other small brown or small orange mushrooms that were around my neighborhood, just hanging out. So yeah, it was like the embarrassment was more that just like, what in the hell is that smell? But yeah, and in that case, it was just, they do that because they're trying to attract like insects that come and look for decomposing material, mm-hmm. in order to get their spores on flies and all the other goodies and spread them around. So one other a different type of mushroom, I actually bargained with it and said, hey, can I utilize some of your energy in my spell work if I promise to just sprinkle spores around from your mushrooms, the fruiting bodies of the mycelia, and got back a very clear yes. So and that established a great relationship, like especially in the case of any living being. When you're partnering with them, if you can like help them reproduce in some way, they love you for that. Like, hell yeah, like help me get my species more out there, and we can be, that's like 50% of the partnership right there, in a lot of cases.
Now, I do like the fact that you've opened yourself up to more mushrooms than, if you think about it, in the witchcraft community, we tend to focus on fly agaric.
Right.
And Amanita muscaria. Yeah. Right. And that's where we focus because it's part of the poisoner's path. But
right.
To hear you talk about working with, not by choice, I'm going to go after the stinkhorn.
Yeah.
But you're willing to work with it.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a lot of different varieties that have a lot of different potential uses. And I think one of the resources that I've turned to a lot is Paul Stamets. He's, probably the biggest name in amateur mycology. Mm-hmm. And he's done so much work with different kinds of different varieties and species of fungi that he can really sort of give you a good idea of like how you might approach them as a spiritual person, as a magical person, because he outlines a lot of the and details a lot of the healing potentials, which can tell you a little bit about the personalities of who you're approaching. So it might be a good way to be, like, I'm thinking of developing a relationship because I want to accomplish X or Y, and his publications and his stuff on the internet, his YouTube channel is just chock full of great information in that vein. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Like, I'm working on another workshop right now and I'm putting in my next book, I'm putting in like an entire chapter, maybe more if I can get my publisher to be okay with it. But yeah, just another chapter, and another workshop in the works on different varieties and how you might approach them, how you might work with them, and not seeing them as necessarily as simple spell components, that's pulling out a term from old school D&D, but a lot of people, we have these like sort of lists of correspondences that we use in our magic, and I'm guilty of it as well, and have been in the past. But the more that I ended up sort of opening up and speaking with the spirits of these different elements, whether it's mushrooms, whether it's stones, whether it's plant material or whatever, speaking with the sort of spirits of these things, my toolbox actually kind of shrunk a little bit, but it became much more useful and deep in terms of how much I can get out of a limited number of resources, because I've spent the time working on the partnerships and partnering with the spirits of those different elements,
That seems a great segue into the next part of the story, where instead of being exiled like in the Genesis account, the servant is given a horse and money, he's given agency. And it's a little bit of a mixed message, but he does work in an animistic collaboration with the beings that he finds, that he encounters on his journeys. And I only say a little bit of a mixed message because he does have a more utilitarian approach with that horse.
That poor horse.
The poor horse.
Well, the thing that struck me, I think, the most was he had the ability to talk to animals, but yet he killed this poor horse.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding.
No.
That poor horse.
I mean,
yeah, that's a really good point. He had to hear it scream in protest.
Didn't even ask the horse.
Mm-hmm.
and not only the horse, I think that there was also the same situation with the goose when the ring disappears. If anything, is that I'm seeing that in the story there is a constant of sacrifice to achieve a goal, which as a person from Venezuela, and that my roots are brujeria based, well, I think that we can see that everywhere, but the social media witchcraft is one thing, and the witchcraft where sometimes bloods, guts, and sacrifice are needed is not necessarily too well received. I'm not saying that is the only type of witchcraft there is, but in brujeria, a big goal requires a big sacrifice, if that makes sense. So it was impactful, not necessarily too pretty to see in the story, but in the back of my head I was like, I mean, it kind of makes sense, you know what I mean? So yeah, I don't know. Disclaimer, I don't do animal sacrifices, but I don't also hate them. It's a cultural aspect. It's what I'm trying to say.
For sure. There's also, like, I feel like to that point, there's like as it relates to the story, there's this triplicity that keeps happening throughout the story, keeps popping up, and there's a larger triplicity that's happening in the sacrifices that he's making, where, you know, he's the first sacrifice is sacrificing the duck, or I think it was a duck, goose, whatever it was. And then, you know, the second sacrifice of his horse, and then the final sacrifice that he, you know, made at the end to try to, you know, sacrificing himself or risking his own life in order to complete this journey. You know, it was just like, you know, there's 3 fishes. I was surprised that that the text didn't mention 3 ravens, 3 young ravens, because it would have been perfect. It would have folded into all of the triplicities that kept popping up.
But my mind went straight to that just
Same.
because
Mine
of the
did too.
3's already shown. I automatically pictured 3 ravens.
Me too.
I had actually thought about the triple death, such as the ceremonial murders of certain criminals, but also possibly sacrificial kings, and the legend of them being, say, like strangled, shot, and drowned, or something like that. And he is threatened with death multiple times throughout.
You know, the one thing that I liked about that, like, that poor horse, it was brutal and whatever. It was even the duck. It was like, come on, you know, like that was the best way to accomplish that. But it does sort of, like when you start working in an animistic framework, like you have to take a hell of a lot of responsibility for your actions, and you have to get okay with the impact that you're having on the world regardless. Because, I mean, I used to be a vegetarian, but I you know, since I had a kid, it's not easy to stick to that as much anymore. And so I have to take responsibility for the fact that I'm eating animals, you know, and eating animals that I am potentially could have been in partnership with at one point, you know. So there is like, I liked that part of this story, that there's like these elements of sacrifice, and some of them come at great cost, you know, or with great, you know, levity on whatever is happening in your life, you know, like, just because you can partner with certain beings doesn't mean that you also are not potentially responsible for their destruction, you know. And I think as humans, like, we have to get a lot more in this era, we have to get more plugged into what it means to be sort of these like arbiters of destruction, and take a lot more responsibility than we have been for that. We kind of just wash our hands of it and make you know, pretend like we're not too involved in all of that. But
well, growing up in the South and growing up not from a wealthy family, I learned that at an early age because we were taught to hunt.
Right, exactly.
But you were taught to hunt the right way. You were taught to be respectful of the animal. You were taught not to take more than you needed.
Yeah.
All of that. So I don't feel like today's generation is offered that same. And it's just like when I go to sit in the woods. I mean, trust me, I'm scared to death of a possum, but it's always going to come up to me. Yeah. Always. I mean, I can count on my hands the times I've been sitting next to a tree and not a squirrel, not a fox, not anything else. It's going to be a possum. But I can appreciate what the spirit of that animal offers, what the personality of that animal offers.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us as humans to get back to that respect and that relationship, and the word that you used, the partnership with those spirits. I mean, it's crucial that we get back to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's in my view, it is our past. It is how humanity got to the place that it ended up. But we abandoned that knowledge and the wisdom that comes with that knowledge a long time ago. So, and we have to just reunite our human identity as being a part of the overall sort of matrix of the universe. You know, we're not separate from it. We're not separate from other animals. You know, so yeah, there's a lot of needing to sort of ante up the responsibility that we have been shirking for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, and losing that thought that we're superior, to those animals, to those spirits.
Yeah, and that's I mean, in my view, that's a very clear. I don't know if it's rooted precisely in Abrahamic religions, but it didn't help. They didn't help.
Yeah.
And Christianity just like severing the connection. I mean, like in Genesis, the connection between humanity and the kingdom is severed, like in the first sentence or whatever. So yeah, it's yeah.
Well, and two, the translation that was given was we were given sovereignty over the animals.
Right.
And we as humans are automatically going to take that as I'm the higher species. I can do what I'll please.
Well, it is my understanding also that that's the interpretation that we give like in this era, because if I'm not wrong, in the original word, it was more like a stewardship, more than sovereignty, which is pretty much management, not necessarily exploitation. But
right.
I actually wanted to add, again, I already talked about the sacrifice aspect, which for me was, it sucks. I actually felt a little bit more sad for the goose, the duck, than the horse for some reason. The goose was like, oh my god, I cannot swallow, and he was like, okay, time to open it up and to take the ring out of this. But
duck is delicious. Just
listen, I'm from Venezuela. Like I've eaten horse and I've eaten goose and goose not. I don't think the goose, but duck. I've eaten duck. And everything tastes good if you have the right spices. My opinion. But listen, stones go good with enough salt. That's me. I'm a cook. Yeah, but in reality, like when I see this dude willing to sacrifice the horse that he was traveling with for other animals, like I don't want to overthink it, but in his mind he was like, these baby ravens are not going to survive. I have to do something drastic, you know. And I do not want to excuse unnecessary sacrifice, but based on the story, it was not unnecessary. I like to think, based on what I read, that there were elements behind that story that simply did not appear in the tale that I was reading, that made this character consider the only thing that I can do right now is sacrifice all this horse for the little ravens. This is like where I'm trying to go through. And because sacrifice is a concept that constantly is being taken away further and further from current practices within spirituality and even witchcraft, a lot of people do, and I'm talking like from my experience of what I can see from social media, and also as a beginner, and even as an ex-Christian, a lot of people do think about manifestation, intention, energy. God will open the door, like everything is going to be placed onto your plate without necessarily understanding that in order for you to achieve B, A has to be done. And sacrifice is a big thing. For me, even within my practice, you have to give away something in order to achieve other something. Sadly, that something was the horse. I felt sad for the horse, but then he had the support of a whole bunch of other animals that yeah, establish that partnership.
Well, and I kind of look at it this way too. It was an act of compassion that drove him to kill the horse, which each instance that he came in contact with something, it was an act of compassion until it came to the princess. And then it was just, he was struck by her beauty. But that's what got him the helper spirits, is when he acted toward compassion, or acted with compassion toward those. I mean, the fish, would you ever really think that a fish could do much for you? Right. Other than nourishment? I mean, if you look at baby ravens, same thing. I mean, would you ever really, I mean, unless you're a part of the magical community, would you think that something...
A whole colony of ants. Yeah.
So I think the other thing that I was looking at the horse in terms of what it represented. And in a lot of ways, for me, it was like, so horses are, transportation, maybe even like the chariot card of the tarot.
Definitely.
And this horse has been a literal vehicle for the servant through this liminal space that he has ventured out into. So by killing it, he's essentially made the sacrifice to his own journey. Like, there's no going back after that point. Like, he can't, like, in the literal bones of the story, like, he could go back to the king and be like, "Hey, king, I'm back, and yeah, I just killed that horse and fed it to some birds." The king might be like, "That was not a good use of the awesome gift that I gave you." But also, just in this like spiritual sense, like, you can't turn around after that. After you have made that level of sacrifice, it's a commitment to the arrow of your journey, wherever it's taking you.
And that was one thing that I saw in it too. I saw that as a disconnection from the past.
Yeah.
In killing the horse, that was the last thing that he had gotten from the king.
Yeah.
And after that, it's like you said, there's no going back either way. I mean, you go forward, and that's the only way you can go.
Right. Yeah.
Once he makes that sacrifice, another messenger comes along and gives him an opportunity from a new king and the prospect of wedding a princess, the daughter. And we have the first of a 3-part trial and another possible proposal of death. Mm-hmm. The trial is that he has to retrieve a ring that is dropped in the water. And interesting, because this is the second sunken ring motif that has popped up in the story, which might be the way it's become garbled over time or not. But the ring enforcing this next motif of marriage. And I brought up that little preamble that I read about the sacred brotherhood because it reminded me of James Fraser in The Golden Bow, and later on in The Golden Bough, and later on in The Origin of the Magical Origin of Kings. It talks about how originally it was sacred magicianship that was placed over rulership of communities, and then towards the end, and how they were united to grain deities such as Attis or Attis or Osiris, or possibly even Dionysus. Then went on with a sacred marriage to the female who represented the Divine Mother. And there's a lot of little things that weave into this tale now that start reminding me of all these theories, and the fact that some people have explained or I guess theorized that one of the ways that these kings participants were united with the god was through an entheogen, a literal god making substance. So we have the key. He retrieves it. And the next one surprisingly or not, is grain. He has to fill the sacks of grain again, like a fertility deity, and then finally achieve the apple of immortality. Sorry, that was a lot of information dump all at once, but please feel free to go wherever you like with any of these next parts of the story.
The one thing that intrigued me was that the king had only had one requirement. The other ones came from the princess.
Mm-hmm.
Because she thought that she was better than he was.
Yeah.
And I mean, even in the story that talks about him being a handsome young man. So it wasn't about the looks or anything. She had a high opinion of herself.
Station.
I mean, we are talking about a story where, I mean, even until today, we had a clearly different social structure in the story. So we still are taking elements of how the disenfranchised or the lower straight or status do utilize spirituality or witchcraft to be able to counterbalance the the lack of equality in this existence and reality. We again are seeing, forgive me for the use of the expression, we are seeing how witchcraft is utilized finally, or to constantly balance that unbalanced lever, I guess. I don't think that she had a high opinion of herself. She was a princess and he was a servant, and that's now that we are seeing that in Bridgerton and stuff like that. But in that social structure, they were each for their own. So even though she kept adding more trials, he kept going through them, through those alliances that he built with these animals, or even the spirit animals. I did find most impactful, as I mentioned earlier, the ants. I think that you mentioned we see the ravens flying and they get the apple of immortality, or even the fish, but I do not find many stories utilizing ants or very, very small insects as often as a force of nature to be reckoned with. The ants fill the whole sack in a night. I like working with ants, so that's why I was like, "Oh, okay, this is cool. I like this." So yeah.
And if she was either united with or becoming a representation of the goddess of the Great Mother, I think it would be her duty to place trials in front of the suitor to make sure that he's worthy of being united to the land or uniting to her. And there's like the Sed festival in Egypt where the king had to go through a virility rite every however many years to make sure that he was still strong enough to be worthy to be king and to be like united with Hathor or Isis.
Yeah. Yeah, the scattering of the grain was a real, like, the whole Osiris thing and the reassembling of the god, you know, that it was reassembled by the ants is almost like there's such like a magic to the relationship that he had there, you know, that he's pulling on all these threads of connection that he's created in his sort of journey to, I mean, at the end of the story, he is essentially the king. He's the next king. He's the third king of the story. Because when the, you know, the existing, the princess's father king dies, he will be king or king regent or whatever. And yeah, there's a lot of that, like, those magical threads keep popping up. The challenges as a a block to the wisdom, or as a hurdle to attaining a certain level of wisdom, are very classic in wizard and sorcerer tales, and very shamanic in a lot of ways too. It's not, in some sense it's high magic, but in a lot of ways it's low magic. If you're gonna split it into dichotomies like theurgy and thaumaturgy or whatever, but this is a synthesis of that, and I think that's, most magic is a synthesis of that. I work, even though I'm primarily an animist, my viewpoint is that deities are part of the universe as well, and so I work with them too. Like, I'm not such a pure animist that I have to have a physical representation of spirit in front of me to tie into, and there's some people that have that, but yeah, so it's a very shamanic thing. It's a very classical mythology kind of thing where, reassembling the grain felt like putting together the god, in some way. And it led to, or at least it was the thing that ended up leading to him stepping into his own godhood and marrying the princess.
But too, if you look at it, this is a representation of our own magical path.
Yeah, exactly.
Each piece of this, the trials, the leaning on the spirit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, in every, like, the one of the hidden secrets of witchcraft to me is that every day when we step into our magical world, when we are creating the universe afresh, in our magic and in our ritual. And so every day we go, like, if you have a daily practice, every day you're going through these sort of, like, starting at the beginning and constructing the entire thing. And that's how we learn how to sort of control our magical power in a lot of ways. So yeah, totally. I would like to bring up, though, that it was a little like, it's still a very patriarchal story. And the part that got me at the very end was that when the servant brought the golden apple to the king's beautiful daughter, who was without any further excuse to turn him down. So it's like, it was like the storyteller is like, so she had no justification not to marry him after that. So she just ate the apple.
And they both lived happily ever after with a lot of
right, yeah.
And they ate it together.
It just felt like it was like begrudgingly ate that apple, and
their hearts were filled with love.
Right.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to mention that here in the page 5 of the story, I was noticing that 3 ravens flew towards him. So at the end, it does denote the triad. Yes. He went through 3 kingdoms looking for the apple, and then 3 ravens fly towards him. Taking in consideration the religion of the time when this was written, I could assume that the constant number 3 appearing in the story can denote a sort of divine providence, I guess, to obvious taking in consideration that, I will say. Yeah.
And interestingly, the apple is the apple of immortality. So which comes from the tree of life. So because he's already received the knowledge, such as the tree of knowledge. But now this apple very specifically either had to, in my mind, from like Freya's garden, or
Right.
orchard, or we could say from the Garden of Eden, the tree of life that was hidden away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love that they split it, actually.
Yeah. I'm having my Bible knowledge is not up to scratch right now, but weren't there two trees in
There was the tree of the gut and knowledge
Yes,
of good and
yeah.
evil, and then the tree of life.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
I am agreeing with the. Well, maybe I think that I'm jumping a little bit back too far, but I'm gonna latch on what Dave
Let's
did
do it.
mention, like in the different phases, or yeah, like the journey of the magician, the witch. Certainly, we can see the initiation aspect when he eat the snake, which I did find funny. I was not familiarized that snake is an animal that is eaten like in Germany. So I'm like, okay, okay, that's cool. Definitely the building, the sacrifice, so the spell crafting, building the relationship with familiars, the magnum opus, I will say, but still goes through trial. Like, even though being a witch does not take him away from the realities and hardships of this life. So yeah, I'm not adding anything new. I'm just agreeing with what Dave said fully and completely. I do think that this showcases the journey of the witch, but the initiation aspect, eating the snake, the white snake, which it did hit, it did ring a bell in my head. I can see the white snake, but I was trying to look for any type of information on why a white snake, and I was not able to find anything.
Interestingly, the Brothers Grimm, in their notes on this story, after the stories, they usually explain why they've included it. And the only thing they really touched on with this story is that the theme of the gaining the ability to speak with birds is common in many German stories, and either comes from eating a piece of a dragon, such as Siegfried, or a white snake. And they name two other stories that I've never heard of or been able to find anything about. But so they claim that this was actually a motif. And now I don't know if they were familiar or not, but like now a lot of symbolists would say that when we're talking about the cosmic snake, the dragon and the serpent are the same thing.
And that's what I was going to bring up, is that perhaps the snake was more of a dragon than a snake, and maybe it's a translation thing. If it were the word wyvern were used, or wyvern, it may have been translated as snake instead of dragon.
And what I tend to do is I tend to take the properties of whatever it is and kind of pull them apart and then put them back together. Like, what does white normally symbolize in magic? What does a snake normally? What's the correspondence with the snake? Things like that. So.
Yeah, and I saw white as, I even wrote down in my notes, like, white as purity, but also white as the amalgamation of all colors. So if we're looking at it from a, sort of evolution of the Magi sort of storytelling, it is all colors, as we, as he's trying to learn and grow his wisdom. He's being exposed to the full spectrum of knowledge that is imparted on him in some ways.
But even still, like, at the very again, and obviously it's like keep dissecting the first part, but it does make me ask like a lot of questions. Like, okay, this individual just ate a small piece of this white snake and gain the ability to speak with the animals. This king has been for a undisclosed amount of time eating a whole snake by himself every day. What the hell? In my head, it's like, is there a moral reason? Are we seeing like the hoarding of resources, indiscriminated hoarding of resources just to be able to keep himself as a king? Are we seeing like the deity aspect? What will have happened if this individual eaten the whole snake instead of just a piece? I don't know. It's just me like going all over the place. I did honestly enjoy this particular story. I think that the relationship building with the animals was the most impactful part for me. I enjoy like I was going to say I enjoy the creation of familiars. I only have one, but I always have thought that the ability to build more and more relationships equals to the ability of you to do magic. So I don't know. I think that is cool that at the end of the day he have these he can communicate with the animals and also has the support of different species. We are seeing a species of the water, the air, and the earth at the same time. So we're talking about dominion over certain areas of nature. It is very interesting. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, the horse is a creature of the land. The duck and the ravens are creatures of the air. The fish are creatures of the sea. You know, there is that. If we're looking at it from the sort of Celtic three worlds model, like that's, you know, it's all covered there for sure. And he's sort of reaping the benefits of a relationship with each of these elements of the elements as he goes through. There was one. The other thing that I was thinking when you're talking about the king eating the whole snake, like it still takes me back to the Taliesin story where Taliesin had 3 drops of that giant cauldron of Awen, and as soon as he put it into his mouth, the cauldron went fetid and it was useless. He didn't have to consume the whole thing.
Yeah.
All he had to do was have a taste, and it was as good as having the whole thing. Or it was, in the story we're led to believe it's as good as consuming all of it.
Well, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I was going to say, yeah, it wasn't my understanding that in this story, like that potion only works for the first person that drinks it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was the reason of why I went rinsing. But I don't know. I was like, sorry. I I went there. I apologize.
Dave mentioned seeing the story as like a personal or like an everyman's magical journey. I'm wondering if anyone has thoughts on how the tale could be used in some sort of work, in some sort of narrative charm or something like that.
Honestly, I think that you could definitely use, it could be worked around. You could use a ring as a part of the representation, because the ring is brought up there are rings brought up a couple of times. You could even use an apple. And use it to engage the spirits of certain animals that you wanted to work with. There are tons of directions you could go with ritual and
Yes.
spell work, things like that with this. Just tons.
I was thinking maybe in a sort of healing or wisdom type of working, literally utilizing the greeting that the ravens give to the servant. We are the 3 young ravens that you delivered from starving. When we grew big and heard that you were seeking the golden apple, we flew over the sea to the end of the earth, where the tree of life stands, and we fetched the apple. I was kind of thinking on if I have the opportunity to find like the the feathers, I will utilize them as a placeholder of the spirit of the raven, maybe. I would, of course, before doing this, I was thinking on a sacrifice, like an actively working for maybe like creating some sorts of nest for birds, or who knows, maybe here in the city, maybe offering some volunteering in a veterinary, yeah, like hospital, something along those lines. But if I am following the structure of the story, I will definitely think sacrifice, petition. Well, I think that fits with any type of a spell work. Sacrifice, offering, libation, petition, act, and reaping the result, I will say. I'm overthinking it.
And it's like you were saying with wisdom, the apple is typically associated with wisdom.
I was assuming it more like towards the life aspect, because the apple in this story is like the apple of immortality from the tree of life. So I was kind of thinking on that aspect, like maybe I will offer this apple to a person that might be sick or something along those lines. And even then, even if he was doing all of this for this princess that he fell in love with, obviously he was doing it for the girl, but he was not necessarily doing it to say, hey, I'm assessing dominance, even though it's a very patriarchal story. Like he it seems like he liked her, and at the end of the day he divided the apple with her and all of that. So I'm kind of thinking that the spell should be always aimed towards a third person, I will say. I guess I'm just, yeah.
I think that you could easily fold the story into a sort of progression of an apprentice, or I'm thinking it, looking at it and thinking of it from a teacher perspective, if I have students or whatever sometime, of using something like this and having a reading of it as a mark of their progression. Because I think, especially like if you're doing like a 3-degree system, it could be really ideal for that. And different elements of the story would feel more impactful at different levels of progression for the initiate to be, or the candidate for initiation. As you go on, the first time, your first pass at hearing this story might, certain elements might pop out to you more than others, and then by the end of it, if you're not seeing the sort of uniting of the king with the earth, of the god and goddess, then you're not good, ready for initiation or whatever, So it's that, just another different take on it.
Yeah, I think what's the thought I had is presenting my libation or sacred meal, whichever offering I have, to the deities, and asking them to impart a bit of their gifts into that before I consume as well. Well, we've reached the end of this tale. Were there any thoughts or themes that anyone wanted to get to that we haven't talked about already?
I don't think so. I'm pretty happy with the discussion.
Yeah, I feel the same.
Great, thank you. Likewise. Well, again, I was super happy that you, Nathan, agreed to talk about this tale. I think the relationships he builds with the animal figures, as well as the other themes that we've already covered, reminded me a lot of the work that you write about, and I can't recommend it to anyone who's listening to this enough. Are there things in the following months that you'd like to let people know about?
Yeah, sure. I'm on the board of Mystic South conference in Atlanta, Georgia. This year, it's happening July 26th through the 28th. And if you want to find out more information about that, you can go to mystic-south.com. And I'm a little more light this year on appearances because last year my book launched and I booked everything that I could. And it was really very taxing. It was a lot of fun. It was a great learning experience, but it made me want to dial it back a little bit this year. So aside from Sacred Space, I'll be at Mystic South, and then at the in September, I think I'll be at the Temple of Witchcraft Temple Fest in Massachusetts. So those are the appearances that I have on my radar right now.
Very nice. You have a follow-up you have to be working on, correct?
Yeah. I've got a looming deadline, and my work situation changed. So I was part-time for a very long time, and then I got bumped up to full-time, which I needed, but it was also like, oh my gosh, when do I have time to write my book now? So I'm like trying to work all of that out, and the balancing act is fun.
Yeah. After about maybe 6 months or so of recording and releasing these discussions, I went from full-time to part-time as well. And now I'm like, the backlog is getting a little larger and larger. I'm like, okay, I have to start editing faster. And I think I've been experimenting with not utilizing video, because then I only have to edit the audio, so I think that's going to help.
Yeah.
AB, do you have anything you want to let people know about?
Nothing that I can publicly talk about yet. There's some things that are coming up that I'm very, very grateful and happy about. But nothing that I can officially talk about as of yet. Is still in the back burner. I am officially working as well, so I'm like, I'm officially working again. So I am like trying to focus a little bit on my own channel. And again, my focus is beginners, not as in to teach, more like to share my own journey and where I'm at as of now. So I pretty much I invite everyone, like, just if you are in the same place as me, if you are learning and you want to discuss and share and talk about books, which is what I like, follow me and let's talk. So nothing major really. I deleted my TikTok. Right now I'm focusing a little bit more on Instagram and YouTube, because that was that was consuming a lot of my time and my energy, and I'm very happy that I decided to do so. And that's pretty much as it. My TBR is growing exponentially, so I think that I'm reading as of now 5 books at the same time.
Yeah, I think you're likely being a little humble about not having things to tell people about, because you are constantly releasing updates, reviews, spell ideas, and have a number of recent videos on YouTube, including interviews for people to find out. So that's at AB's Witch Journal. Was Sarah Mastos the most recent?
Yes, the interview with Sarah Masters was the most recent. Currently, I'm taking one of her classes, and yeah, it's been a cool adventure. Transitioning from I guess figuring out my I was going to say about figuring out my practice to having someone that is like, guiding you and giving you a little bit more of a structure is being a cool adventure. I am enjoying it so far. And honestly, her book The Sorcery of Solomon was chef kiss. Right now I'm also reading Dave's book, and it's so lovely. So I'm really having fun. I'm enjoying the process.
That's the point. Yeah.
Yeah, Dave's book is really lovely. Unfortunately, Dave had to step out to take a phone call from his family, so he'll catch up with us on our next discussion. And until then, may all your journeys be filled with wonder